lives, life. Go like you miracle. One else, oh,
this. Spiritual growth. It will hinder you from drawing nearer to God. And guess what? You'll be like the Israelites who just become impatient. Impatient. You know, for the Israelites, their immediate response to God's mercy was called for worship. That should be the immediate response, is a call to worship. And God provides His word to the Israelites so that they do not repeat the creating of their own way of worship again, of creating an idol in their life to worship based on that impatience. And so God is preparing them to enter a promised land, and He lays out some laws. Why? Because He knows when they go into this promised land, they're going to see customs, they're going to see practice and cultures of foreign nations around them, and they're going to have this distorted view of what worship is. Because you remember, they're going to a foreign land where they're worshiping their pagan gods. They are not worshiping, they're godless, they're lawless, and so God's preparing them. And how does He prepare them? He prepares them by giving them the book of Leviticus. Now, how many of you have tried to read through Leviticus and it's like, it's a lot. Come on, raise your hands. And I was like, And so when I first started reading it, it's like, man, that's a lot. And I'd have to go back and read. It's like, what? And go back. It's a difficult read. And the reason why it's difficult to read is because it's so hard for us to fathom what that culture is like. We are not in that culture back then. You have to remember that they left Egypt. They left Egypt, and they were under the rule of who? Pharaoh. They were following Pharaoh or Egyptian laws, and now they're removed from that, and they are wandering for a little bit before they go into the promised land, and God says, I will set this right for you, and gives them Leviticus. And so even though I've read this so many times, and I've viewed it as, and I probably the same way you guys view it as like, oh man, these are just old ancient laws. How many of you's ever seen that? And then there's on the other extreme that like, who read these laws, and then all of a sudden you're just like, I got to follow these laws to the T. And then you just live this a life that's not under grace. And we often view these book of laws as hard and rigid. But there's a reason why God gave it. There's a reason why God gave these laws. And it's much more than a book of laws. So I want you to change your mindset that Leviticus is much more than a book of laws. It is about God's holiness. Seeing is God's holiness and his call for his people to be holy. The first word in Leviticus is Vayikra. It's the very first word. When you open your Bible in Leviticus 1:1, it's Vayikra, and it says, well, yours will probably says, or the Lord called Moses. Vayikra means the Lord called. Now, he called Moses, but he called Moses so that he can call the Israelites. Because remember, Moses was a mediator. He was the intercessor. So he spoke to Moses, and he called Moses on them. And he says, come here, because he's going to do the same thing with the Israelites. Call your people. So when we look at Leviticus, I can't go through the whole thing because there's 27 chapters. And they're long chapters. And they're like, got to get through it, got to navigate through it sometimes to read it over and over to get it. But I'm going to break it down before I get into today's passage, just so you get a basic understanding, right? So the first 7 chapters teaches Levitical priests how to give offerings. So hopefully this will help you read it a little bit more. So as I give you details or a summary, your details will draw from when you read Leviticus on your own. So that first 7 chapters, it reveals to the Levitical priests how they should give offerings. And it's basically is an offering of worship. And then chapters 8 through 10 describes the ordination of Aaron and his sons as priests. So what is that? Basically, God is describing what intercessors for worship looks like, who they should be. And in the beginning, it's Aaron and his sons. And then chapters 9 through 15, God lays out the laws for how the Israelites are to live a clean life, a holy life. And what is that? It is a preparation for worship for them. And then chapter 16 describes how the priests are to make atonement in the holy place. Basically, they're saying this is how you will sacrifice in the holy place. And then chapter 17 through 27, God instructs the Israelites how to be a holy people. And what is that? That is how to have a relationship of worship with him. And it teaches the his glory. How are the... And forgiveness is just the start of that. Do you hear me? So that brings us to our passage this morning. After this, to summarize what learning how to it was an intercession. These chapters or that's these verses, and you think about Leviticus now, but going to 26, 1 through, because I'm telling you, you will read Leviticus differently. It won't just look like a book of laws anymore. It'll just jump out at you and go, it's like, what? What? Because God's revealing his holiness in there. And he is her God, and he goes, I am holy, and you are holy. So how many of you ever been to a place or an event or whatever it may be that you go there new and you don't know what to do? You kind of like look around and you kind of watch people to see what's next, what's to be done. For example, when we moved to Barrie, I started being part of time, 30, 40, for a long time. So some of them, they're like second, third generation. Their parents, they're going the routine. Nobody explained the river band in Gilbert, and it's not. To me, it was my cross. And listen to me, I'm not going to down you if you are, but what happens if that you rely on that? Being in the word life should be a place of worship. So neat about like that of worship in our Christian, that they spend times. It's easier to be reverent, but that's not what us. He's the one